What if history wasn't random? What if the universe was recycling old stories, whispering strange patterns through time, patterns too precise to ignore? These aren't just eerie coincidences. These are chilling repetitions that make you question reality itself. Let's begin. In 1898, a little-known writer named Morgan Robertson published a novella titled Futility. In it, he imagined a marvel of engineering, a colossal British ocean liner, the biggest ship ever built. It was filled with the world's wealthiest passengers, hailed as unsinkable, and met its end on a frigid April night when it collided with an iceberg in the North Atlantic. The ship's name? The Titan. The Titan didn't carry enough lifeboats. Over half of its passengers died in the freezing waters. Now here's where things stop feeling like fiction. 14 years later, in 1912, the RMS Titanic launched from Southampton, bound for New York. It too was the largest ship ever built. It too was called Unsinkable. And on its maiden voyage, it struck an iceberg on a cold April night. Due to outdated maritime regulations, the Titanic had only 20 lifeboats, nowhere near enough for the 2,224 people on board. More than 1,500 died. And yes, it sank at nearly the exact same location as Robertson's fictional Titan. Both ships had triple propellers. Both were around 800 to 882 feet long. Both had similar passenger capacities. Even the name Titan echoed like a ghost through time. Was Robertson a prophet? A conspirator? A time traveler? He insisted he wasn't psychic, just observant. A sailor by trade, he predicted where shipbuilding was heading and knew the North Atlantic's dangers. But still, the precision of his fiction remains one of the most disturbing coincidences in modern history. Presidential echoes. Across a century. Let's leap from the sea to the seats of power. Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy, two presidents, separated by a century, yet seemingly cast from the same mold. Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. Kennedy in 1946. Lincoln became president in 1860. Kennedy in 1960. Both men were advocates for civil rights, and both were assassinated on a Friday while sitting beside their wives. Lincoln was shot in Ford's Theater. Kennedy was shot in a Lincoln made by Ford. Their successors? Both were named Johnson. Both were Southern Democrats. Andrew Johnson was born in 1808. Lyndon B. Johnson in 1908. Their assassins. Lincoln's killer, John Wilkes Booth, was born in 1839. Kennedy's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, in 1939. Both killers were known by 3 names. Both names had exactly 15 letters, and their final acts mirrored each other in a bizarre inversion. Booth shot Lincoln in a theater and fled to a warehouse. Oswald shot Kennedy from a warehouse and fled to a theater. Neither assassin lived to stand trial. Even their secretaries are part of this strange rhyme. Lincoln's secretary was named Kennedy and warned him not to go to the theater. Kennedy's secretary was named Lincoln, and she warned him against going to Dallas. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the pattern is so intricate, so symmetrical, it feels like history isn't just rhyming, it's copying and pasting. In 1900, King Umberto I of Italy sat down at a restaurant in Monza. His server approached, and the king was stunned. The man was his exact double. Same face, same build. But that was just the beginning. Both were named Umberto. Both were born on the same day in the same town, Turin, on March 14th, 1844. Both married women named Margarita. And the server had opened his restaurant on the very day Umberto was crowned king. It didn't stop there. Both had served in the same regiment during their youth. The king was so amazed by this doppelganger that he promised to honor the man the next day at a public event. That day never came. Hours before the ceremony, the restaurant owner was shot and killed. Moments later at the event, King Umberto was assassinated by an anarchist. 2 lives, identical in name, looks, history, and fate. In 1838, Edgar Allan Poe published a novel, his only full-length book, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym. In it, 4 shipwreck survivors are stranded at sea. Starving, they draw lots to decide who will be sacrificed for food. The loser? A young cabin boy named Richard Parker. Nearly 50 years later, in 1884, a real yacht, the Mignonette, sank. 4 survivors escaped on a lifeboat. Starving and desperate, they chose to kill and eat one of their own. His name? Richard Parker. Same name, same fate. And the real-life event triggered a landmark legal case in England, which ruled that necessity is no defense for murder. Poe didn't just write horror, he seemingly summoned it into existence. Mark Twain was born in 1835, just 2 weeks after Halley's Comet passed by Earth. As he grew older, he joked that he would die when the comet returned. In 1909, he said, "I came in with Halley's Comet. It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it." On April 21, 1910, he died, just 1 day after the comet's closest approach. He came in with the comet, and he left with it, a perfect celestial bookmark to a life filled with irony and observation. In 1940, 2 identical twin boys were adopted by separate families in Ohio. Both were named James. One became James Lewis, the other James Springer. They didn't know about each other for 39 years, but when they reunited in 1979, the revelations were staggering. Both were 6 feet tall, both weighed 180 pounds, both had dogs named Toy, both loved woodworking and hated spelling, both married women named Linda, divorced, then married women named Betty, both had sons named James Allen, spelled differently. Both were sheriff's deputies, both smoked Salem cigarettes, both drove light blue Chevrolets, both vacationed at the same Florida beach. Coincidence? Or something buried deep in the DNA? In the 1970s, actor Anthony Hopkins was cast in The Girl from Petrovka. He searched London for a copy of the novel, unsuccessfully. Dejected, he sat down on a bench at the Leicester Square tube station. Next to him, a copy of The Girl from Petrovka. 2 years later, Hopkins mentioned this to the author, George Pfeiffer. Pfeiffer had lost his personal copy, one with handwritten notes in the margins. Hopkins showed him the book he found. It was that very copy, the author's own annotated edition, returned by fate in the most impossible way. In 1922, the first death related to the Hoover Dam occurred. A surveyor named J.G. Tierney drowned while scouting the Colorado River. 13 years later, the dam was almost complete. On December 20th, 1935, exactly 13 years to the day, another worker died. His name was Patrick Tierney. He was J.G. Tierney's son. A father and son, bookending a colossal project with their deaths, on the same day, 13 years apart. In 2002, a 70-year-old man was hit and killed while riding his bicycle across a busy highway in Finland. 2 hours later, another 70-year-old cyclist was struck and killed on the same road. When police investigated, the unbelievable truth emerged. They were identical twins, living separately, unaware of each other's whereabouts, and they died in nearly identical circumstances, just miles and minutes apart. The universe doesn't just play dice, it sometimes scripts the final act in chilling synchrony. The Romanov dynasty ended in blood and whispers, but hidden behind the revolution was the ghost of a number, 17. The family was overthrown during the Russian Revolution of 1917. Nicholas II abdicated that same year, and on July 17, 1918, he and his entire family were executed in a basement. 17. Their rule ended 304 years after it began. 3 plus 0 plus 4 equals 7. Add that to the date, 17, and it's hard not to feel like numbers were writing their fate. Some called it coincidence, others a curse. These stories are more than strange facts. They're mirrors. They reflect how reality sometimes bends into patterns too precise for chance. Maybe we live in a world of echoes. Maybe fate has a script it loves to rerun, or maybe, just maybe, the universe has a dark sense of humor, and we're all part of its punchline.